Hello, good evening and welcome. I'm Karima Brown and you're watching Political Exchange, where we unpack Africa's political economy. South Africa's official opposition Democratic Alliance recently unveiled its plan to grow the economy, setting an ambitious target of 8% as achievable. To unpack the policy proposals, we speak to DA leader and Western Cape Premier Helen Zille, who joins us from our Cape Town studios. Premier, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. Your plan is ambitious.
It's a pleasure.
Setting 8% as a target. Many economists have registered concerns that it is overly ambitious. What makes you confident that this is doable?
It is a very ambitious plan, and we need to be ambitious in South Africa. We have a crisis of youth unemployment, and we have to set our targets high and we have to aim for them. But we don't believe the targets are too high, because many other countries in comparable positions across the world have achieved them in the good times. Now, we know that we're currently in a financial downturn internationally, bordering on a recession. But we believe that in those times particularly, one has to prepare for the upturn and get all the policy positions in place to maximize the advantage of the coming upturn. We look at countries like Vietnam, quite extraordinary history, racked with conflict and violence, poor growth, huge levels of unemployment and poverty, and how they turned that around. Countries on our own continent, various countries, but we look at particularly at Ghana, that has had an extraordinary track record over the past 10 years. We look at places like Peru, Turkey, others, and we see that South Africa hasn't done nearly as well as we could. And extrapolating from those lessons, we believe that 8% is possible if we get all our ducks in a row, and it's certainly what we need to aim for.
Now, some people have argued that your logic of endless growth ignores finite ecological resources and also assumes that growth automatically creates jobs. Now, we know for a fact that that is not the case. Where is the energy and resource policy to outline how accelerated growth, in terms of the DA's vision, takes these things into account?
Well, firstly, not all growth leads to jobs. There is this phenomenon called jobless growth. But the converse is even more true, that you never ever get jobs without sustained rapid growth. That has been the case in all the examples. And certainly growth that provides incentive to employment results in more jobs. And that is the combination that we're looking at. And most particularly, we see the green economy as a major job generator. We see the transition to a green economy being a challenge, but also a huge opportunity creator, especially in our magnificent resources of sun, of wind, of wave energy, and the backstream economies that come onto those infinite sources of energy. So the green economy is very substantially locked into our plan, and the finite resources that we face is one of the motivating reasons for our plan.
Now, the DA's plan distinguishes between insiders and outsiders, but some critics have said that this pits unemployed people against the working class. Surely bringing the unemployed into the labour market should be possible without making lower income workers feel guilty about demanding decent wages.
No one is making anybody feel guilty at all. But we're saying the key to South Africa's future is to ensure that people feel included. And the best way to feel included in one nation with a growing democracy and a growing economy is to get a job. That is the key lever of inclusion. And we believe that all of the policies that need to be followed need to make it easier to create jobs and get jobs, not harder. And many of the vested interests that argue for policies that make it harder to get jobs are excluding the people who don't have jobs. And that is the real problem.
Now, Premier, one of the suggestions in the DA's plan is, of course, to rein in or cap public sector wages. You believe that bill is unsustainably high. But is it really fair to take, say, a clerk in a frontline service like, say, Home Affairs, and say that person shouldn't be demanding decent wages because someone else is unemployed?
Well, across the board at the moment, wages in the public sector are very high compared to the private sector. And every year for the last 5-6 years, the public sector wage increases have been significantly above inflation. Now, there's a point at which that is entirely unsustainable. And one gets to a situation like Greece, where people could retire early, got fantastic packages, had above inflation salary increases every year, and then the economy collapses. We have huge numbers of people employed in our public service, far more than used to be the case. And with constant wage increases above the inflation level, it becomes totally unsustainable for the state.
But
there are certain professions that I believe really need to get decent wages and salaries, and those are teachers, policemen, and nurses. Many officials, I believe, get much more than they would, comparatively speaking, in the private sector, except for very rare categories such as information technology specialists. But otherwise, the public sector has done very well.
Now, in terms of public sector wages, these are of course very carefully negotiated in your relevant bargaining chambers. And of course South Africa has a highly organized public sector. How does your economic policy take into consideration the need for social compacts that recognizes labor as an important constituent of such a social compact?
Yes, of course, labor is a very important constituent of such a compact, and we want to have more workers. That's the entire point. The workforce is dwindling relative to unemployed people, and we want more and more people to be part of the workforce, to get a foot on the first rung of the economic ladder. That's the way people get into the economy, add value to the economy, develop skills of their own, and raise their children while they're progressing with their careers. That's the entire point of this exercise. We can't have a situation where very big companies working with big government, working with big unions, work together to exclude everyone else. And that creates the crisis of exclusion that we face in South Africa at the moment, and it's the crisis we need to address.
But Premier, the reality in South Africa is that many people, in fact the National Planning Commission says that the wages of one employed person is often used to assist up to 10 people in South Africa. If you're talking about reducing wages, are you not going to be making families poorer in real terms?
No one's talking about reducing wages. No one's talking about reducing wages at all. I mean, people who are in jobs have their rights protected by legislation. What we're saying is if one worker has to support 10 unemployed family members, what we're looking at is trying to get 5 of those family members into jobs.
But
that
by cutting people's
the
salaries.
Situation fundamentally.
But if you're talking about a public sector wage bill that is unsustainable, where are you aiming to make that cut? I mean, if you take, say, for example, a public prosecutor who doesn't earn a lot of money, how is someone like that salary, or if you cap it, how is that going to assist in getting, you know, more people into the economy?
What we're looking at is ensuring that the public service comprises those officials who are really capable of doing the job at hand and paying them properly. Now, the big problem in the public sector is that it's been used as a repository for deployed cadres. Anybody who's owed a political favor gets found a job in the public service, and usually quite a high-ranking job. And so in many parts, and it's certainly not true of everyone, there are some outstanding public servants, particularly outstanding teachers, nurses, public prosecutors, policemen. There are some outstanding people across the board. But there are also others who are put there as political favors. And the public service is packed full of deployed cadres who the government's own commissions and the Auditor General, for example, says are not up to the job.
But Premier, let me interrupt you here. I want you to be specific. Which sectors in the public sector is bloated? Because we also know that the public sector is struggling to actually fill posts. We have in some provinces where you have, you know, a huge vacancy rate. So which sectors particularly is the DA targeting? Where do you think the problem lies?
Well, I think it lies everywhere. I mean, in the Western Cape government, for example, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to move somebody on through incapacity to do the job. So then when someone cannot do the job, they're found a kind of cozy position somewhere else, while somebody else, usually a consultant, is brought on to do the job. And so of all the commissions and analyses of the South African state, they find that many consultants are used to the tunes of billions of rands every year.
But surely that's not a problem of the public sector, Helen. I'm saying surely that's not a problem about the public sector and wages. That's a question of how government does business in terms of getting in consultants. That's not a labor issue.
That's a huge issue because, in fact, that's what pushes up the wage bill so high. There are probably far too many people in key positions for whom consultants have to be used to do the job they should be doing.
Now, Premier, the DA's plan talks a lot about poverty reduction, but we also know that South Africa is one of the most unequal societies in the world. What does the DA talk to about reducing the income gaps and also, in fact, pushing back inequality?
Well, the best way to deal with inequalities is to get more people into jobs and to get the economy growing and to create career paths for people. There's no other way of doing it. The other ways are entirely unsustainable. Locking people into permanent dependency of grants, firstly, isn't sustainable, given the ratio of taxpayers to grant recipients. And secondly, will always keep people locked in poverty and keep the Gini coefficient very high indeed. So the only way to get out of that over the long term is to have a rapidly growing economy with people with better and better skills because the education and training system is improving, so that people have the skills to move up the economic ladder and get better and better jobs. And over the medium term, that is the only way to sustainably address inequality. That is the major purpose of our plan, apart from getting more people into jobs.
Mm-hmm. Now, the plan also talks about reducing the cost of doing business, but how does the plan prevent the private sector from abusing this freedom that you hope to extend to them, whether it's the labour, law flexibility that the DA is advocating for, or even the wage youth subsidy?
Well, let me simply say this. We must remember that investors with capital and skills can go anywhere in the world. They are wanted everywhere in the world. And they decide on the basis of competing factors where they're going to take the risk and where they're going to invest. And if we want to be the chosen destination, if South Africa wants to be the chosen destination for investment, because you don't get jobs without investment, we have to create conducive conditions for people to choose to invest here rather than to invest in other places. But obviously there have to be appropriate regulations so that you prevent abuse. We are also very opposed to abuse. So, for example, in the temporary labour market, we would want to have a strengthening of oversight mechanisms, and we would like to have that sector formalised so that you don't get the fly-by-night abusers of labour into that sector. But we believe that we should never abolish temporary jobs, otherwise there will be many, many millions of people, additional people unemployed, and the mechanism to give people experience through temporary work, which would give them a foot up into the permanent economy, would be taken away. So we believe in the right regulation, but we also believe in making it easier to invest, to start businesses, to remove the red tape, of which there is far, far too much in South Africa, and give people a chance to work.
Premier, we have to take a short break now, but when we return, we continue our conversation with the Western Cape Premier and leader of the Democratic Alliance on the party's plans to grow the South African economy.